just, to me, so invigorating. I always learn something new. So we are now going to shift and to our guest speaker, and it's Emily Copeland. And Emily is, both Brian and I have known her personally and have worked with her for quite a number of years. So she's a friend, a dear friend, and she's the Associate Director at Science Communication Network, bringing more than 15 years experience in media relations, public affairs, and science communication. She graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Journalism for Public Relations, which has been in the news a lot. She also holds a Juris Doctorate from the Florida International University College of Law in Miami, Florida. In her spare time, she enjoys snorkeling, volunteering, and spending time with her dogs in South Florida. So I will just hand it over to you, unless, Brian, you want to chime in about anything.
No, not really. I mean, having worked with Emily, she's one of the best at not only training scientists, but also she also work, I mean, they work to get the science into the media. So it's really kind of a two-pronged approach I've relied on for years to find stories and find scientists. So yeah, very happy to have her here.
And I've worked with Emily and her colleague, Amy, very closely, and when I often have had papers that we think are going to be get media attention, my communications office at my university often partners with Science Communication Network, and it's a really effective way to get your science out. So with that, Emily, I'll pass it over.
Great, thank you both for having me. Yeah, I've been following Agents of Change since it started, and I've just been such a fangirl of the project. So I'm really honored to be here to talk to you guys today. So I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Okay, so yeah, as both Ami and Brian mentioned, I'm with Science Communication Network, and really our goals in working with scientists are to make them comfortable in speaking with different stakeholders, which include policymakers, journalists, other academics in their field, and then lay people. So one module we've developed is the social media sort of basics for scientists. And I would wager we have people on this call with a range of experience on social media. So while I'll cover mostly the basics, I'll touch on some practical tips that I hope you'll find useful even if you're more advanced on social media platforms. And then given it's a fairly large group, I'm going to just save the questions for the end. We'll do Q&A at the end. So I've created this presentation based on questions and concerns I've heard from environmental health scientists and advocates over the last 10 years. I get the following questions a lot. I'm really busy. I don't see the point. What's the real value of being on social media? I only have 200 followers. Why does it matter? So I hope this presentation can answer some of those questions. So there are numerous social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, and I anticipate many of these are probably familiar to you. Maybe some aren't so much. Some of these you probably already use, but maybe only in a personal capacity versus a professional one. Some of these platforms are better than others for use professionally as a scientist or researcher. In order to use your time most efficiently and reach the audiences that you'd like to reach and best reap the rewards of online science communication and the networking that you're looking for. And I'll touch more on this later. So why should you care about social media as a scientist? There are approximately 3.8 billion people using social media, which presents an enormous opportunity to engage with a range of audiences that, on your research findings that, or other aspects of your work that you might not be able to normally. Scientific dissemination has also grown exponentially over the last decade due to social media. It's an opportunity to hone your science communication skills, make you and your science more accessible, which often builds trust with non-scientists, which is a really good audience that most of you are probably trying to reach. A recent paper in pediatric and perinatal endocrinology, two epidemiologists, Doctors Bodnar and Fox, said, until the last decade, scientists were often just a name on the byline of an article or textbook, or someone you saw at a conference or invited lecture. Interaction or debate occurred at annual meetings or in letters to the editor. Now, engagement on Twitter is daily, and it has made many of us more approachable, relatable, and also better scientists. Something to keep in mind. So getting started. Sorry, I skipped a slide. I'm going to cover three main topics today. Pros and cons of being a scientist online or a researcher online. Number two, building your brand or your presence on social media. And I know brand can be kind of a cringy word or get a bad rep, but when I say brand, I don't mean like a sales pitch or marketing or influencer. It's really just your professional and your identity online as a scientist. I'll also discuss some tips and strategies on how to protect your credibility online as a professional scientist, and also how to deal with harassment if it comes up. So pros of being online. Number one, you get to learn. It's a place to get the latest news, identify journalists who cover your science. It's a way to learn about what's happening in your field, about upcoming conferences, papers that others have published, advocacy and community groups with whom your research may impact. It's also a place to get help and advice. You can learn about issues facing those in academia or in STEM. Some examples of that would be how to tackle being a new parent while getting your PhD, how to deal with toxic coworkers or racism in the workplace. You can find advice on being a better PI or a mentor. It's also a place to learn about new jobs and calls for paper submissions. I've seen Ami tweet out before too for the Journal of Exposure Scientists, calls for papers. So that's a good example. As with pros, there are of course cons. Oh wait, let me finish. Pros actually. So the second pro I call is networking. Social media is an opportunity to grow your professional network beyond those that you may immediately work with. There are others in your discipline at other university or institutions you can connect with. So while you may be the only one researching what you do at your institution, social media can allow you to connect and engage with those doing similar or adjacent work at other places. It also lets you connect with historically excluded groups or those who have been left out of mainstream academia, which gives you a more diverse perspective in your field. There's also value in networking with other disciplines beyond your own in the field. You all are doing that by participating in Agents of Change. So that's a good example. It's also a way to connect with community groups or advocacy groups that care about the same issues that you do. You can also connect with those working on policy that may use your science to underpin their policy, or other people and groups who may be affected by the research that you do. Ultimately, you can increase your professional visibility that can lead to job offers, funding, collaboration efforts on future projects. And those projects may be research or policy or science communication. So the last pro is dissemination. Social media can allow you to share your research more widely. It can make science more accessible to audiences beyond just the scientists in your field. You can sort of break out of the typical echo chamber. It's also an opportunity to comment on others' work, amplify other voices, talk about openings in your lab or at your job opportunities at your institution, talk about awards you've received, or flag for others presentations or webinars that you'll be giving so they can attend. So of course, yeah, as there are pros, there are cons. And the one big one is time. I know pretty much everyone that I've worked with who's a scientist is incredibly busy all the time. And social media can really eat up a lot of your time if you're not careful and plan out your strategy for being online ahead of time. There's also opportunity for hostile interactions online. You may end up dealing with bots or trolls who comment on your post, or industry reps and contrarians who dismiss your science and your expertise. There's also opportunity for controversy, which is other scientists and academics questioning your science, or journalists maybe asking tough questions that you hadn't thought of with regards to your research. However, I really don't think the cons need to outweigh the pros, because the value of communicating your research and your passion is so immense. And I would wager that you all agree with that, since you participate in the Agents of Change. You're ready to share your passion. So next, I'm going to talk about some basic tactics to build your brand and protect your credibility, so you're prepared for some of these cons. I recommend these 7 steps in building your brand. And by building your brand, what I mean is it's essential to create a social media plan or strategy, no matter where you are in your fluency on social media platforms, whether you've been doing it for years or whether you're just getting started. I think these different steps can guide you and giving you a little bit more control over your online presence, which ultimately should help you be much more comfortable and feel much more safe when using social media. So step 1 is a self-audit online. Google yourself, what pops up. Step 2 is creating goals for yourself. Step 3 is creating a profile. Step 4 is connecting with colleagues, scientific societies, your institution, conferences you attend, etc. Step 5 is sit back and observe. Step 6 is developing a posting strategy and start engaging. And then step 7 is likely your goals will evolve over time. So you'll use what you learned to revise your overall plan over time. So getting started, Google yourself. I recommend everyone do this because it's interesting to see what happens. If you're deliberately present online, you can control what people see up front, right? So once you Google yourself, you'll see the top 3 links, and other people are going to do that, whether they are a prospective employer, a community member who's heard about your research or is impacted by your research, or even journalists. So it's a good way to think about controlling your online presence, you know, sort of siphons people to what you want them to see when they search for you. So step 2 is determining your goals for social media. And this helps you determine how you want to present yourself on socials, but also determine which social media platform can help best achieve these goals. And one thing I will say is each person's strategy is going to be highly tailored, right? There's no one size fits all for a social media strategy. Not everyone here is setting out to be, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So keep in mind that, you know, your goals should reflect who you are and sort of what you want to achieve. So what are your goals? Do you want to stay updated with news and events in the fields? Are you trying to find a job? Are you hoping to collaborate with other researchers? Are you looking for funding? For example, tweeting about a study can increase citations to that paper. Articles that many people tweeted about were 11 times more likely to be highly cited than those who few people tweeted about, which is interesting. So once you've determined your goals, I recommend starting small. Twitter and LinkedIn are good places to dip your toes in if you aren't online already. Twitter is also a great resource for scientists and scholars like yourselves because there's a robust science community on that platform. LinkedIn is a good opportunity to essentially create a living CV. I know I don't like updating my resume all the time, so it's kind of nice to have it in real time. Twitter and LinkedIn are also good places where I found that you can manage your time spent there a little bit better than maybe maintaining a blog or constantly creating new content, video content for TikTok, for example. That's much more time intensive. So that's why I'm going to kind of focus my time with you today on Twitter. I just think it's the best first place to start. And many have found it to be sort of the most bang for your buck in terms of return on investment. So here's a helpful chart from the American Geophysical Union. And there are a bunch of these charts and resources online, and I've got resources I can share with Ami later to share with you all. But this is helpful for determining the different kinds of social media platforms, who's on them, and then how time intensive they are, right? You may just not have the time to devote to something like a TikTok, but you may have time for Twitter, which is why I recommended it's relatively less time intensive. So are you better at writing or are you more creative with videos and graphics? And do you have a specific audience that you're trying to reach? These are all questions that can help you determine which platform is going to suit you best. As this says, Instagram is much more visual content, right? Graphics or photos or videos even, but much more time intensive. If you're good at writing, LinkedIn and Twitter are good venues for that. They also help you get a little bit more tighter and concise in your science communication. So just talking about your findings in a much more accessible way. So think about who you'd like to connect with and why, and that'll help you determine which platforms you may want to spend your time on. So next step is creating a profile. This is Dr. Fuller. And I'm going to use, again, like I mentioned, Twitter to sort of illustrate the rest of the steps in building your brand. But a lot of these steps apply to the other platforms. I'm just going to use Twitter as sort of a case study. So here's some pointers for creating or editing your profile in case you already have one. So obviously you're going to choose a handle, which can be, your name or even your lab. It could be the lab at your institution. But if you use a lab handle, you may want to contact your institution to see if there are any guidelines regarding that. Choose a photo. And then I recommend choosing a header photo or image that explains a little bit more about you than just maybe your science. So Dr. Fuller lives in Atlanta. She uses this Atlanta skyline that shows much more than her as a scientist. It's her home, it's her community, it's personal to her. Then you want a short bio, include your title, your interests, your passions. This is a good place to use hashtags, and hashtags are keywords that act as a link between all tweets and profiles that use that hashtag, that keyword. So you can follow other people who are using the same hashtags. It's easy, the bios are easy to change as your interests change, and the hashtag in your profile can lead people to you. And then I always recommend searching a hashtag before you ever use it, just to make sure it's one that you want to use. And then I would use 2 or less as a general rule of thumb. This is also, your bio is a good place to link to your university profile page. And you may want to your current institution, and side projects like Agents of Change. Stephen Lopez also has a really good, this is a good sample bio. He was also able to incorporate his side project, ADSE, and then he's got a picture of everybody in his lab. So it kind of is representative of everyone working with him, which I thought was cool. So once you have your profile set up, you can start following, start connecting with people. People you know, people you don't know, but maybe you've heard of, people whose research you admire. Groups include professional societies, maybe that you're a member of or want to be a member of, or advocacy organizations that you think are following similar issues that you're interested in. Conferences that you attend are a good way to, if you can't attend maybe a conference face-to-face, you can follow discussions that are happening at the conferences. Usually conferences have their own unique hashtag each year. And then you can also follow hashtags themselves, which you can follow discussions that people are having about a topic that you're interested in. So finding people to follow, a good way to start growing your network is to follow those who follow, like this group, for example. You can also follow people your colleagues follow. Often once you follow someone, they follow you back, but they don't have to, and vice versa. Someone follows you, you don't have to follow them back. And once you follow someone, their posts appear in your feed, and if they follow you, vice versa. Here are some sample hashtags, maybe to get you started if you aren't following hashtags. These are ones I personally follow, and I find the conversations to be pretty interesting on Twitter. Here are some accounts also that I would recommend following, especially if you want to get some diverse perspectives in what's going on in STEM or in academia. Also, if you're interested in I Am SciComm, that is an account that has Twitter takeovers, which is a different person takes over that account for the week. And I personally learned a lot for different science communication tactics. Just today, they were talking about incorporating accessibility into tweets using alt text and making sure you use, descriptive captions for images that you use in case somebody who's using a screen reader, say if they have vision impaired, for example. Uproot Project is also, I think would be of super interest to this group. It's environmental writers who are also historically underrepresented and excluded from mainstream media. So it's sort of, that would be an interesting one, I think, for this group. Here are, so once you get following, here's some other people that I recommend to follow. Once you start following, I recommend sitting back and watching. So lurking is an online term for when you look, but you don't engage. It's sort of like learning traffic patterns before you start to drive the roads. Lurking allows you to see what you like that others are doing. It also allows you to see what you don't like that others are doing, which I find equally helpful. And you can also use others' inspiration for your own brand and your own social media strategies. So these are suggestions of people that I think who do it pretty well. And then of course, EHP is just up to the minute papers that are coming out. Raven Sci-Maven is a big time SciCommer. She's a PhD. She's not really in environmental health, but she's somebody to keep an eye on, who I think communicates really well as a scientist on a really big platform. So eventually, after you lurk for a while, it should make sharing your own content and your own posts easier. You can, start retweeting things you like from people that you follow, add comment to things that you like or are interested in. and add commentary, to threads and posts that are talking or that are discussing things that are of interest to you. So when you start engaging, a lot of people ask, what should I post? They don't really know where to start. And so engagement is essentially determining what kinds of posts and then the frequency of those posts. So Twitter has 280 characters, which is not very much. And not everyone uses the full character amount. In fact, often less text is often better for readers. But coming up with a posting strategy, my friend Julian Silverman said, keep it simple, stupid. He said, just remember KISS, keep it simple. So start simple. You'll spend a couple hours up front creating a profile, searching around. You may want to start slow, once a week, twice a week, and then integrating a variety of different posts over time just to get used to it. Think before you tweet. If you're ever nervous, maybe take a step back, get input from a friend or a colleague. Share content you like. Don't share content or amplify content maybe that you don't like. And you'll get more comfortable over time, and your voice online evolves over time. So different kinds of posts for Twitter, and this goes for LinkedIn and Instagram as well. Self-promotion. So an example of this is papers you've published or awards you've received. Share a link to the study itself once it publishes online. Again, that ups the citation factor. This is also an opportunity to link to maybe a news article that covers your study. So informative, an example of this is I'll be talking on an upcoming webinar, or of a job that's opened up that people may be interested in and can apply, or to talk about a conference you plan to attend and you want others to register for. Commenting, you can comment on recent issues within your research expertise or on a topic you follow closely or are passionate about. So if you're following a discussion thread, you can @ someone and include them in a conversation or a post that you think they may be interested in. And adding someone is tagging them by using their social media handle. It serves to get their attention, and they often get a notification. Other kinds of posts include congratulatory posts. So applaud others' efforts with regards to recent publications, awards, or tell them thank you for something they've done for you. This is also an opportunity to tell journalists that you liked an article that they wrote. That sort of pops you onto their radar, especially if your work is the kinds of work that they cover often in the news. And then personal is, could be photos from you gardening, at home, or maybe a selfie at a conference with other colleagues. So this is also very much only if you want to. A lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable integrating their personal lives into maybe their professional presence online. But then again, scientists are human, and integrating your life outside of academia or your interests outside of academia can make you much more humanized and approachable, especially to non-scientists. So here are some examples of informational tweets. Pretty straightforward, but yeah, webinars, conferences, papers that publishing. And here are a couple examples of self-promotional tweets, which, yeah, straightforward, you get it. And then the next step in your strategy and in your planning should just be revise and adapt. So after a few months, maybe go back and see if your goals have changed or if your strategy is achieving your goals. If it's not, maybe it needs some revising. Figure out what you learned from lurking and how does that affect maybe your social media goals. And then authenticity and voice comes with time. It's basically just practice. So don't rush it and don't feel like it should be coming faster than it does. Another topic that I think is very important is dealing with conflict and controversy as you're online. So unfortunately, if your research is controversial or is, you know, essentially challenges the status quo, it's likely that, you know, you'll see this online. But just like with media interviews, you can be prepared. And being prepared really protects you and protects your credibility. And I think Amy, my colleague Amy Costin, is going to be doing a media training 101, and she'll probably hit on a lot of things that I'll say here. So hopefully we reinforce each other. But preparing for controversy or conflict, it really starts with also making a plan. Before you get started, before you maybe tweet about a new study that may make waves with media or other academics, plan ahead of time what your strategy for that is. Check in with your press office or the comms team, communications team at your institution. They may have support they can offer, or school suggested guidelines to follow. One thing I will say is online cycles are thankfully very short. If you're afraid you don't have the time or the nerves to deal with potential criticism or backlash on a paper you have coming out, you may not want to proactively post about it. However, I will say posting yourself gives you much more control over the main messages you relay about your findings and perspective. It's almost better not to fill the void, lest it gets filled by someone else, essentially. Another way you can plan ahead is to think about tough questions you may encounter in advance. For example, what are common criticisms you may hear about the particular study design that you used? I know epidemiologists encounter that quite a bit. You also may want to ask colleagues for advice on a potential post that you want to post. And you should sort of enlist your peers and other allies to support you with comments on your posts or their guidance on what you have suggested you've written out in advance. You can solicit help from others who are online who may do work or experience the same things that you're concerned about experiencing, whether that be conflict, controversy, or harassment. Being deliberate really helps protect your credibility versus being reactive. I know sometimes in the heat of the moment, you want to just throw something up online, but I always say take your time. Nothing is really worth over immediate reactivity. And a couple things to keep in mind to protect your credibility also is always be accurate. As scientists, you don't want to guess or speculate or speak too far outside of your expertise. Watch yourself if you're using words like cause when maybe you mean association or linked to. It's helpful to have citations to science that back up your findings or your position. And also be honest about any uncertainties in your work or your research, and explain the limitations of your research. I've also found, we say this in media training as well, traditional media training, but I find it resonates as well in social media, is the younger or earlier you are in your career, the more deliberate I would suggest that you try to be. The unfortunate reality is that younger voices and BIPOC voices are often much more heavily scrutinized than, somebody who's been tenured and established in their field for years and years. I also would suggest to know when to engage with people who are commenting or attacking you. The mute and block and report features on Twitter are your friends. Muting is you no longer get notifications about a thread or conversation that you're in. Blocking is, if you block someone, they can no longer see your activity or posts, and you can't see theirs. You can also report people for harassment, inappropriate or offensive comments or messages. And then before you respond maybe to criticism about your science or about your positions, is to ask yourself, is it really even worth it? Does it make the conversation productive? Criticisms can feel very personal and emotionally upsetting, but social media moves fast and it's often a short ride, and then the site is on to the next thing, which is both good and bad. Whoever's commenting, I recommend checking out the person's profile. Are they real? Sometimes it's a bot, or maybe it's a troll, or maybe it's a known contrarian, someone like, you know, Steve Malloy at Junk Science, for example. But visit their profile, see what else they've tweeted or commented. A troll is like a schoolyard bully. They're just trying to provoke you and get a response. Often those aren't worth responding to at all. A bot is no followers and is often little information in their profile. Again, not worthwhile. And then a contrarian, you know, stands against most issues that are mainstream. But if the person commenting is maybe somebody you know or know of, maybe it's, and that you respect and think is legitimate, sometimes you can take it offline. You can email them directly if it's a conversation you think is worth having without the limitations of Twitter. You know, 280 characters isn't much, and it's hard to often get, you know, the right tone or tenor across in such a limited space. When it comes to harassment, absolutely report. There's a reporting function for that. Unfortunately, Twitter does very little to protect people who are harassed. So there are a few tactics that you can use to kind of protect yourself against online harassment. One way is to scrub your Twitter lists. And what this means is people can put you on a Twitter list, and that can often be a source of other people attacking the people who are on those lists. So if someone's put you on a list, you can remove yourself from that list if it's what you find to be a source of other people sort of attacking you and commenting sort of all the same things on the people who are on that list. You can also opt for a private account that gives you a little bit more control over who can see what you're posting and who can send you messages. There's also features on Twitter that can dictate who can reply or comment to a post that you make. There's also some apps and browser plugins like Twitter Blockchain and Block Together that can help you filter out some of the negative harassment and attacks online. Twitter also offers two-step protection, and then you'll want to maintain a complex password and remove personal information if you're worried about doxing, which is someone revealing your personal information online is a way to attack you. So yeah, just one word of advice is Twitter is notorious for not protecting marginalized communities online. So that is one big con, but the more sort of control you can exert over what it is that you're posting gives you much more control over, and who can see it gives you a little bit much more control. Okay, so to recap, I think, yeah, we've covered a lot of information in a short amount of time. So being a scientist on social media or a researcher gives you the opportunity to expand your network and the reach of your science. It's a great tool to expand your network of colleagues, journalists, community, or nonprofit groups that might be affected by your research. It may lead to more citations for your papers and raise the visibility of your research. Make sure that you're deliberate. Always plan ahead where possible. I may sound like a broken record, but planning always just gives you a little bit much more control than sort of wandering into it without one. That way you aren't reactive and you're less likely to post or comment something that you wouldn't otherwise. For example, maybe don't post a news article without reading the whole thing. Don't just like to appease people. You should represent your values online with what you post and how you react. Also keep an eye on protecting your credibility as a scientist. What goes online can stay online. Depending on how you intend to use social media, it can be a good professional forum for you. And it really should be an outward representation of you as a scholar, and should represent your values, your ethics, and your commitment to science and other causes. And at the end of the day, remember to turn it off. Don't let social media be a time suck. I'm guilty of this, so I urge you not to do as I do, and do as I say and not as I do. But it's always good to take breaks and then come back and remember what trends or inundates one day is old news the next. I've also compiled some resources, and I'll be able to share this with Ami, who can pass it around if it's of interest. There's a wealth of information online to help you continue to learn about using social media as a scientist and improve your science communication skills. So here's a short list that I've put together for you all. The AAAS has a good communications toolkit. And outside of general communications guidelines, they have a good section on social media specifically. Nature's Jobs blogs has good entries on using social media. It's helpful for information for different platforms, and good discussions on the benefits of using social media to increase citations. Your press office, don't forget that, you know, while they may be busy, that's always a resource you should approach, or your communications office at your institution. And then of course, my organization, if you ever need to reach out, we're a resource. The online harassment field manual is very comprehensive and super, super helpful. It's extensive. It's a whole online website that it answers pretty much any question that you may have specifically. And then other tools you can start integrating to help maybe you plan out tweets, or if you're interested in tracking the visibility or analytics of the tweets that you have already done, TweetDeck is a good free option for that. There's also some free functionality with Sprout Social and Planoly if you want to just map out tweets in advance, once you get maybe a little bit more advanced or comfortable online, and you really know what your social media strategy is going to be. There's also Canva and BioRender, which are both good if perhaps you're going to be more visually oriented with your content. So using, you know, creating infographics, or you want to create graphics about your study findings or visual abstracts. These are two good resources that can help you create that for free online. Yeah, so questions? Yeah, we can open it up to Q&A.
Thank you, Emily. That was a lot of very useful and practical information. Questions from the group? Folks want to share how they're using social media now, or how they're not, or why they're not, or what, you know, questions that you've kind of thought about yourself in terms of social media engagement.
Yeah, I would also be interested in hearing, you know, how you tackle maybe any of the issues I talked about today personally, and what you found has been successful in your own approach to social media. I think the group could benefit from that too.
Hi, thank you, Emily, for the presentation and the great tips. I've always wanted to talk about more science in my social media, specifically in Instagram, but I haven't because of some issues I think I have. And my question is, what do you think, or what is the opinion about using two different languages, Spanish and English? Because I'm from Puerto Rico and I have audiences or people that follow me from both places. And what do you think? Is doable? I think it's more doable in Instagram, but in terms of Twitter, is it okay to have like a Spanglish thing going on and some tweets in Spanish and others in English?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Instagram definitely, as you mentioned, with their caption feature is much easier, right? To have both your caption in Spanish and in English. But yeah, I definitely, you could do, it's more time intensive, say on Twitter, to have to write that, but just do a tweet in each would work just perfectly. But I think, again, what the content and of your posts on, regardless of the platform, should really be geared at, you know, what you think your audience is most interested in. And so if your audience is in Puerto Rico, then yeah, you know, integrating Spanish would be super important, right? And it makes it much more accessible for maybe people who don't, who are there.
Yeah. And also in Twitter, I've also, you know, felt a little bit scared because of the conflict part, because Twitter in Puerto Rico can be very aggressive and they're always fighting and that, but I will try to use the tips you gave us today and be more out there, because I usually do a post from like the ones you mentioned, but not like comments or sharing more of my science because of that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's figuring out your comfort level in terms of your, you know, how much time do you want to spend on Twitter versus spending on Instagram, right? We all have finite time and resources. So if the audiences that you really want to reach are on Instagram, then, you know, Twitter may be just not where you're most active. And you can also, you know, if you schedule stuff out in advance, you know, a lot of people are really want to make sure they're reading every comment and every criticism under every post of theirs. And that's not always the best exercise because there's a lot of people, you know, most people who are criticizing you or where the conflict is coming from doesn't represent the majority of your audience's perspective, right? So I sort of keep the eye on, is what I have to say resonating with the audience that I want to reach? And I always think about reverse engineering what's going to be most impactful for my followers or for the communities that I want to reach or the audiences that I want to reach. And then make your content fit sort of those needs.
And another last question. If I'm to start talking more about my science in Instagram, I already have a personal account. And you mentioned that it is okay to mix the personal life and the science's life. And if I'm going to begin this talking more about my science, is it okay to just start in my personal account, or should I open a new account for that?
That's kind of up to you. You know, it's also a personal preference. I personally have some personal accounts, you know, to keep in contact with my cousins or, you know, aunts and uncles versus like my Twitter presence is purely for science communication. And I don't really integrate personal onto that. I would just say if you're going to start integrating science communication and your science into your personal one, I would just double check that all of your past content you're comfortable with anyone seeing that. If you start to accumulate more followers and maybe, you know, people who don't necessarily know who you are at home versus your professional in your science. So you just have to be comfortable with whatever is on there as you're okay with anyone seeing. And you know, and as you publish more research and then, you know, y'all are active in agents of change, right? You're gonna essentially get more eyeballs. So just be comfortable with what those eyeballs are saying. And again, that's a personal preference. And I know that's a squishy answer, but it's really just personal comfort zones, especially when it comes to your personal information. I know, you know, some people don't like to post their children or, you know, or they love to post their dogs. I don't know. It's just up to you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'd love to make one quick comment and then ask you a question. In relation to the two separate accounts, I think the other reason why I have two separate accounts is because I want the algorithm to feed me different things on those accounts. And so that is another consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that very specifically on Twitter. My personal one, I follow a lot of stuff that's happening locally, right in Miami. Like all my hurricane alerts come to my personal, not my professional. And then if you're, if analytics is a good consideration to think about, if you're wanting to see what your reach is, but your personal is mixed in, then that may sort of affect what your science communication analytics would show with the reach for your science versus personal. So that's a really good point.
My question is, so I think the newest one on the scene is Clubhouse. And so I'd be curious to hear your hot take on Clubhouse.
Yeah, I actually started lurking on Clubhouse like in January, I think. And I've seen it just kind of go crazy. It's weird. I think there's a big space open. There's a void on there for actual expertise. There's a lot of people on Clubhouse who people want to hear themselves talk, and sort of self-appointed experts. I think what's actually missing is the meat behind the expertise. Actual experts talking about science versus maybe influencers who are on there. Because, Instagram sort of co-opted a lot of the influencers, especially in the eco wellness environment area. And so they're all talking about, personal experiences and anecdotes are important and can be inspiring. But I've sat in a lot of rooms where just nothing is underpinned with actual scientific information or bases. So I think there's a big opportunity on Clubhouse for misinformation to spread in that way. But like with the other social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram, you can you can really curate the rooms that you want to listen in on and people that you follow. So you can get alerts that, oh, this scientist is talking. Like, I think I listened to Jane Goodall on a Clubhouse, which was pretty cool. I was like, I can't believe she's on Clubhouse. But, so you can get alerts for certain speakers, which I think is pretty neat. But it's an awkward app for it happens in real time. So if you miss it, you miss it. Most people don't record it. But yeah, it's kind of the Wild West, in my opinion, but we'll see where it goes.
Thanks.
Sure.
Any other last comments or questions?
I'll just say really quickly, I think in my experience using Twitter in particular, I found like what's been most kind of like terrifying, but also rewarding in terms of like translating into opportunities offline has been like not just like self-promotion, but engaging with other people's work, whether it's like tweeting an article I'm reading or like responding if someone starts a thread and they're asking for questions, even if it's someone I don't know in real life, like other scholars whose work I respect. So I feel like that sort of like, I think it's like a two-way street. Like if you put something out there about your work and you want people to engage, I think it can be meaningful from time to time to engage with other people's work as well.
Absolutely. It's a great platform to amplify other people's work, which I think is really cool, especially, within the scientific community and then also to journalists. If a reporter posts a study that, touches on some area of expertise that, somebody else may have a good comment or perspective on, you can flag for that reporter other experts, especially like within this Agents of Change group, you should talk to XYZ, and then that raises their profile and their visibility with that journalist or that organization or that scientist. I agree. Good point.
I think another fun way to do engagement, I mean, I don't do this a ton, but like I know like Matthew Fox, who's a professor of epidemiology at BU, does this. He's always doing polls and just ask kind of really interesting questions like to the Twitter community, but ones that, I don't know, he gets people just to respond. So that's just another tactic instead of, I mean, you know, is to kind of ask questions, you know, and that's another way for, you know, it could be things that you generally need help with, and, you know, just a way to kind of engage with people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think we're right at time. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming and spending an hour with us and sharing all this great insight and these resources. And if you would mind sharing the PowerPoint, you know, I will definitely like pass it on. And, you know, there seem like there are a lot of great resources. Yeah,
for sure. There's a, I'm happy to pass all of that on. And then Ami has my email. If anyone has questions for me specifics, you know, feel free to shoot me an email or DM me on Twitter, send me a message. I'm happy to answer where I can or point you, you know, there's a lot that I don't know, and I'm by no means the top expert on any of these issues. So I can always point you in the right direction of people that I think may know or may have better resources too. So happy to pass that on.
And just the last thing, so we had Dr. Ariana Planey come to cohort 2 in March, and she gave a really compelling presentation on how to use social media for good, and kind of how her identity as a Black disabled woman kind of, I guess, you know, informs her experience, especially on Twitter. And so we put her presentation on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out too.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, would love to.
Compatible, but, you know, different kind of presentation. She just, you know, talks about how she really tries to amplify the good work she sees out there on Twitter.
Great.
So, all right, well, we'll see you all at the end of August. So happy summer, everyone.
Right, thanks for having me.